In the heart of ancient Rome, far from the noise of soldiers and senators, there burned a flame, quiet, sacred, eternal. This flame was not just fire, it was Rome's soul, and 6 young girls were chosen to protect it. They were called the Vestal Virgins, handpicked as children. Taken from their families, trained in silence, for 30 years, they served a goddess named Vesta, goddess of the hearth, purity, and the eternal flame. They lived in luxury, unlike any other women in Rome. But behind the veils, the jewels, and the marble walls, lay a terrifying truth. One mistake, one forbidden touch, one slip of the flame, and punishment would come, not just from men, but from gods. Because when a Vestal broke her vow, Rome did not forgive. This is not just a story of faith, it's a story of fear, power, purity, and punishment. In a city where women had no voice, no vote, and no freedom, 6 women stood above the law. The Vestal Virgins. They could own land, they could free slaves, they could even speak in court. No man, not even a consul, could touch them. If a condemned prisoner crossed their path, he was spared. They sat front row at the gladiator games. Their word carried divine weight. Their presence was sacred, untouchable. For outsiders, it looked like power. For Rome, it was honor. For the Vestals, it was a prison made of gold. But this power came at a cost that no man was ever asked to pay. Because while Rome worshipped them in daylight, it destroyed them in the dark. It burned day and night. Through wars, famines, and emperors, the sacred flame never died. Because it could, single quotes T. The flame of Vesta was more than a symbol. It was Rome's divine heartbeat. As long as it burned, the gods were pleased. And as long as the gods were pleased, Rome would survive. But if the flame went out, the consequences were unthinkable, and the blame, always on the Vestals. They were sworn to keep it alive. With their time, with their prayers, with their blood, if necessary. If the flame flickered, even for a moment, the city panicked, and the punishment came swiftly. Public flogging, shame, suspicion. The people believed it meant impurity. That one of the Vestals had sinned. That someone had broken their vow. The flame wasn't just sacred, it was a silent judge. And it demanded perfection. Their vow was simple: 30 years of silence, 30 years of purity, 30 years untouched. But what if one of them broke that vow? In Rome, it wasn't called adultery. It wasn't even called sin. It was something worse, spiritual crime, a defilement of the divine. Not just a betrayal of a promise, but a stain on the soul of the entire empire. To be accused of incestum was to stand trial, not just as a woman, but as a curse. No evidence was needed. No witness, no defense. Suspicion was enough. A whisper in the temple, a rumor in the Senate, or a flame that burned too low. That's all it took for a Vestal to be condemned. Because when purity was law, even desire was death. The accusation was made. A Vestal Virgin was suspected of breaking her vow. The city held its breath. There would be no lawyers, no jury of peers, no fair trial, because Vestals were not judged like citizens. They were judged like relics, sacred objects that had cracked. The highest priest in Rome, the Pontifex Maximus, would lead the inquiry. A man more powerful than most emperors. He alone decided if the goddess had been offended, and how Rome should answer. The trial was held behind temple doors. No public hearing, no written record, only ritual, only silence. The accused Vestal stood alone, still in her white robes, her head bowed under the weight of suspicion. Her life hung on the word of men sworn to protect the gods, but not necessarily the truth. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she said nothing, but no matter what she said, she was often already condemned. In times of war or plague, the people needed a scapegoat, and who better than the one chosen to be pure? There were times when the trial wasn't about justice at all, but about politics, about fear, about control. And once the Pontifex spoke, there was no appeal, only punishment, sacred, brutal, final. She had not been buried, not yet, but Rome had other ways to punish its sacred daughters, for lesser offenses, forgetting a prayer, speaking out of turn, letting the sacred flame flicker. The punishment came quickly, and publicly. The Vestal would be stripped of her honor, not her clothes. She would keep her robes, the white garments of a priestess, even as she was beaten. The flogging was done in secret, but the shame was public. The people would hear whispers. She let the flame die. She forgot her place. The gods are angry. Sometimes it was the Pontifex Maximus himself who carried out the whipping, his hands delivering divine justice, or simply political theater. The strikes were said to be light, just enough to sting, but the message was loud. No one is above discipline, not even the sacred. The flogging was not meant to harm the body. It was meant to scar the soul. Didn't need blood to humiliate. It needed silence, obedience, and the fear that next time, it could be worse, because this was only the beginning, and some mistakes could not be beaten away. For those, there was a deeper punishment waiting, one that came with candles, rituals, and a tomb. When a Vestal Virgin broke her sacred vow of chastity, the punishment was unlike anything else in Rome. because spilling her blood was forbidden. To kill a Vestal was to anger the gods directly. Instead, Rome devised a punishment both cruel and silent, being buried alive. The condemned Vestal was led through the city streets. The crowd watched in fearful silence. No one dared to speak. No one dared to look away. She was taken to a small underground chamber called the Campus Salaritas, the evil field just outside the city walls. Inside the tomb, there was no coffin, no escape, only a small bed of straw, a lamp, and a loaf of bread. The lamp would burn for days. The bread would sustain her until death came silently and slowly. The city's priests sealed the tomb, locking the Vestal inside, a living sacrifice to appease the gods. It was a punishment meant to erase her existence, to cleanse the stain of impurity by burying it deep beneath the earth. To the Romans, this was justice, terrifying, merciless, and final. But to the Vestal, it was a slow death, alone in darkness, forgotten by the world she once served. Beyond the ancient walls of Rome, there lay a place whispered about in fear and sorrow, the Campus Salaritas, the evil field. It was here that the Vestal Virgins met their final fate, a place shrouded in darkness, death, and silence. The tomb itself was small, cold, and underground, designed not to kill quickly, but to prolong the agony. Inside, the condemned Vestal was left with only a lamp to light the shadows, and a loaf of bread to stave off hunger. No guard stood watch. No one visited. She was left alone, a prisoner of silence and stone. The gates of Rome were closed behind her forever. Her life, her voice, her existence buried beneath the earth. This gruesome ritual was more than punishment. It was a warning, a message, to all who dared break their sacred vows. To betray the gods was to be erased, forgotten by the world, but never by history. The Vestal was not alone in her fate. The man who dared to cross the sacred line with her faced a punishment equally brutal. For a man to be involved with a Vestal was to commit sacrilege, a crime against both gods and state. When discovered, he was dragged before the people, often whipped mercilessly, sometimes executed, his body left as a warning to others. The punishment was designed to be public, humiliating, and final, to show that no one could escape the law, not even the powerful, not even the reckless. The Vestal's purity was guarded by the state, and the price of violation was death for both. Yet, the lover's punishment was never as shrouded in secrecy. As the Vestal's, he was a symbol of temptation, of human weakness, a scapegoat for Rome's fear of impurity. In the end, his suffering was a grim footnote to the Vestal's tragic story, but it echoed throughout Rome's streets like a warning cry. Not every Vestal accused was guilty. In Rome, the line between truth and politics was often blurred. Sometimes, accusations were weapons in power struggles. Political enemies used the sacred vows as a trap to ruin reputations and control religious influence. Some Vestals were innocent victims of jealousy and fear, yet the consequences were no less severe. History tells of rare miracles and escapes, Vestals who proved their innocence by divine signs or unwavering courage. Tucha, for example, carried water in a sieve to prove her purity, a miraculous act that saved her life and honor. But these stories were exceptions. Most faced condemnation without mercy. The system was designed to protect Rome, not the Vestals themselves. And when the empire shook with crisis, the Vestals were often the first to fall. Their trials became spectacles, their innocence questioned, and their fate a tool in Rome's ruthless politics. The centuries passed, and Rome changed. Empires rose and fell. The ancient gods lost their place to new faiths. The Vestal Virgins, once the sacred heart of the city, were no more in 394 AD. Emperor Theodosius declared pagan rituals illegal. The eternal flame was extinguished. The Vestal Order was disbanded, but their legacy endured. The idea of women devoted to sacred service, bound by vows of purity and power, lived on in the nuns and priestesses of later centuries. The flame they guarded was more than fire. It was a symbol of Rome's soul, a soul that demanded both reverence and fear. The Vestals were punished harshly, but their story is a reminder of devotion, sacrifice, and the terrifying price of breaking a sacred trust. The last flame died long ago, but the memory of the Vestal Virgins still burns in history and in our. But though the last flame was extinguished centuries ago, the memory of the Vestal Virgins continues to burn brightly in the pages of history, alive in stories, legends, and the echoes of ancient Rome's sacred heart. Their silent devotion, their unbearable sacrifices, and the haunting shadows of their punishments linger still, igniting our imagination and reminding us of a time when purity was power and faith was a perilous flame.